Somebody once told me from the government here in Singapore, once said that you break up the adversary population into 99 and 1. That is, the 90% of folks would be amateurs, young folks, or maybe somebody new to technology, just trying their luck to see, can I break into this database? Can I now attack this network? Using simple tools that they learned from maybe a YouTube video online, just playing around, right? Then there will be that 9% of folks that will be much more organized. This is your nation states, this is your trained technologies, developers, cybersecurity professionals who know what they're doing. They have a higher chance of breaking into your system. Then there is a 1% which is at the level of genius. This would be folks that are so highly trained, organized, and resourced. This would be your top 1%, even amongst your nation states.
I think one of the key areas that I look at from a cybersecurity perspective, and I think it's in certain senses underserved. I know that there are several companies working on this direction because there are challenges around it in recent past, is provenance, in the sense that how do you make sure that the supply chain of software software.
Very interesting. If we can just take a step back, looking at the definition of security, right? If you look at that, whether it's cybersecurity or physical security, you're talking about putting a measure in place and trying to protect something, right? So what are we trying to protect here in cybersecurity? I think it's data. That's the asset. But I'm not sure whether you have actually seen those fake camera in reality, right? So that fake camera literally just like, there is not recording anything, but it actually moves, all right? All of those fans that stood up between people and say, hey, put a label there, it stop people going in. Does it really stop people going in if you really want to go through?
Hello everyone, welcome to Simon Sierra's Safe TechTalk session today. I have with me two amazing technologists who I've known for some time. On my left, I have Supreet, and on my right, I have Genie. Genie, why don't you give an introduction about your journey so far? Let's start with you.
Fantastic, thank you. Good morning. My name is Genie Yuan. I kind of start my IT journey since I was 10. I remember going into learning the language called Logo, where you can control the little turtle going around, which is fun. Then I get a computer science degree after university, working into my first job as a web developer, building some apps. Then also helped the company to do a bit of scheduling software integrated with PeopleSoft, which is fun, right? Schedule exam, trying to avoid a back-to-back exam. You got 30,000 students, that kind of things. Then obviously moved my journey into slightly less technical because I found I'm not very, very good at coding. Every single time there's something wrong, it was my fault. I can't stand that fact. So I moved away from it, but I'm still in the data space, still in the IT space, working for corporate. Start doing a lot of analytics, right? Moving my job into BA as well as PM role. Obviously, after the corporate, I went into consulting, start with my own business and then get sold to Deloitte. I was in Deloitte for a little while after that. Then we end in the vendor space that working with some great technology, right? So I'm with Couchbase now, so.
Thank you. We'll come to Couchbase in a second. Supreet, would you like me to do your introduction for you?
Yeah, I want to hear this out.
Okay. For Supreet, I have specially prepared an introductory document. So let's go. Supreet is Director of Solution Engineering at Couchbase, specializing in cloud-based security. With extensive experience in the field, Supreet has worked with customers in various industries, including financial services, healthcare, telco, media, and entertainment, to build security controls aligned with digital native or cloud standards. He is passionate about designing and implementing cutting-edge solutions for businesses and has a track record of helping organizations adopt modern cloud technologies. Supreet, therefore, is an accomplished cybersecurity expert with a wealth of experience and impressive track record. He has worked as CTO. He has a strong background in technology and a deep understanding of cloud. Supreet brings a unique perspective to the world of cybersecurity, currently serving as a lead for...
I started my coding career not with Logo. I did use Logo, but it was basic. I used BBC Micro for the first time. And as it happens, the teacher decided that he wants to play some sound on BBC, and I was passionately focused on that you could do something that manifests in reality from a computer. And that was 5th grade. I don't know what my age was, but
In your 5th grade, you're probably 11 years old.
yeah. But what when I really started to believe that it's one of those career things was probably when I was in 10th grade.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So at that point of time, you started getting into technology as a developer. You started out there.
Playing games, bit of hacking scores.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So that was my intro to technology.
My fun moments are always cutting those 3.5-inch floppy disk.
Cutting it.
You need to cut a box there, and then you tape it, because once you tape it, it's write protected.
Yeah.
If you don't, then you can write into it.
Yeah.
So that was the fun bit.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that we are maybe the last generation which has dealt with 56K dial-up modem, a floppy disk, and then the smaller disk.
9.6K dial-up modems.
9.6K, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it improved to 56.
Yeah.
Right? And then you have the floppy disk, and then you have the smaller disk.
Yeah.
We used to work on monitors that were this big, which were very heavy.
Yeah.
Now everything is changed massively. So going through that journey, we have some unique vantage points for sure, right? I want to focus us on cybersecurity.
Okay.
Yep.
So Preet, your first question is for you. What counterintuitive thoughts do you have on cybersecurity?
What counterintuitive thought? I think one of the key areas that I look at from a cybersecurity perspective, and I think it's in certain senses underserved. I know that there are several companies working on this direction because there are challenges around it in recent past, is provenance, in the sense that how do you make sure that the supply chain of software so software in a lay term seems to be coming out of a single vendor, and everything is sort of cohesive, coming from the same group. That's not how software works. And in that sense, what would be counterintuitive in that sense is that there is a lot of collaboration, a lot of integration going on, and there is no island in terms of software creation, right? And imagine there is a software being built at Couchbase.
Yes.
There is a high dependence on the ecosystem. So in case you're using Java, then you would rely on Maven's ecosystem or Ant's ecosystem. If you were doing Python, you would rely on PyP and pip infrastructure. In case of JavaScript, on NPM. And these are not done by a single vendor. There is no crafting of what goes in and what doesn't. Infiltered by private agencies, by sovereigns, by people who are interested either in your data or in your money, right? And in that sense, structurally speaking, there isn't enough thought given by enterprises, by software producers, integrators, on how do you secure that supply chain.
I think you're touching on a very important point, which I want to bring to the front now, where I personally see that there's an industry where a lot of us are producing software. And when we're producing software, our biggest focus is go to market. Let's ship this fast, let's get customers, let's grow. As a result, there's another subset of the industry, which is becoming very complex, which is the cybersecurity industry, where the goal of these folks or these developers who are working in tech companies, which are cybersecurity companies, is to fix the code that is being produced by the first set of folks. So this too has created something in the industry where you now have companies which are pretty sizable, pretty big, but also very fragmented. So if you are a CISO on the end user side, or you're a CTO on the end user side, these two roles now need to be justified. Earlier, somebody who is looking at software would be looking at security as well. But things have become so big and so complicated that you need a role for a CTO, you need a separate role for an information security, head of information security, or a chief information security officer.
Mhm.
We see this playing out in the US, we see this playing out in Europe, we see this playing out in Asia as well.
Yeah.
So
What are your
this-
thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's actually very interesting. If we can just take a step back, looking at the definition of security, right? If you look at that, whether it's cybersecurity or physical security, you're talking about putting a measure in place and trying to protect something, right? So what are we trying to protect here in cybersecurity? I think it's data. That's the asset. Now, if that is the case, assuming this is the case, we're looking at the asset itself. So I think we should look at, approximately 3 aspects of that asset. Number 1 is authorization of indication. That means who are you and what are you authorized to see? Number 2 is when this asset is sitting somewhere, how are we protecting it? So in this case, translate into at-rest protection, mostly like encryption method, etc. And when this asset is moving around, how do we protect it? Like in transit, encryption, things like that. I argue that regardless where this asset is going, whether it is in a large database or sit in a file system, or actually end up in someone's personal laptop on an Excel spreadsheet, or even sometimes get printed on a piece of paper. Now, I know we're doing less and less of that, but I think from a holistic point of view, from an organizational point of view, people should be aware, all right, and also trying to look at it from an asset perspective. So in this case, you are building a team of defense, right? Rather than just looking at individual software provider and what can I do, and in isolation and trying to do all of those integration. Don't get me wrong, it's still necessary, but I think the job is more than just the technologies here and trying to build the fancy walls, the great walls.
It's a collective responsibility.
Exactly.
Collective responsibility, shared responsibility, that's something which I hear all the cloud hyperscalers speak about.
Both Alice and Bob should make sure that the data being transferred between them is secure.
So Alice and Bob, in your example here, are they both end users?
They may or may not be. Actually, one of the key things here is that we break these things down into end user or server. Pretty much everything is mediated. You don't have you ever picked up the ones and zeros and put it in your hand and jumped around? No, you didn't, right? There is always a mediating software that you and in that sense, most of the cyber technology, there is a program which is manifesting the reality.
Mm-hmm.
And from a end user perspective, the experience matters, and the stance towards security, which is not having massive amount of friction, becomes important.
Okay.
Yeah. However, circling back to your question, I think whilst it is a collective responsibility, we often do not build enough instrument of governance, and hence a responsible office of a CISO makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Without overly labeling it that there has to be this entity, there has to be someone who can, you can put a pin on and say that this person is going to be focused around security stance of the company. It's not necessarily that security means carte blanche, everything should be, secure.
Mm.
It means also things like how do you measure security and risk versus companies' propensity to grow, propensity to provide a impeccable experience to their consumers, because often it's seen as an isolate, right?
Yeah.
All of these functions require budget, right? And that's coming from a single place. And if you go and say that this is isolate, you are not looking at the economic incentives on the other end of the things as well.
Yeah. I do believe these relativities, right? And I like always to associate security with risk. And I don't believe there is a perfect wall that you can build that no one can breach.
Yeah.
Right? That's impossible. Right? Just like you will never find a perfect set of code that will never have bug. Right? So I think going down to the point that how much security you want, or how much effort you want to put into security versus the risk that you can take or your company can take versus the growth of the business. All right. Now, don't get me wrong. That doesn't mean that we don't pay attention to protection of the data, right? Especially the PII that we are talking about. But at the same time, is relevance to the risk profile, right? That this particular asset is exposed to. What happens if that goes out, right? Without a personal identified information, just like a number, a bunch of information you piece together makes no sense. Then I think that is a different security measure, right? Then something is different like a PII. So when you actually go to a lot of large corporate, the first things they do is not talking about measures. The first things they do is doing classification of the asset, right? Is that highly confidential or is that something public knowledge? So there are different measures against different classification of the asset. Then you just build your walls, put in the effort, all right, doing all that according to that particular classification.
Yeah.
Is security about building walls?
Not necessary. It's a mindset, all right? And also, building wall is part of it. I definitely think it's a very important part. But I'm not sure whether you have actually seen those fake camera in reality, right? So that fake camera literally just like, there is not recording anything, but it actually moves, all right? All of those fans that stood up between people and say, hey, put a label there. It stop people going in. Does it really stop people going in if you really want to go through? Okay, I think it's a mindset alongside with many walls that we need to build. So it's a very interesting dynamic when you actually look into all of those psychology thinkings behind security, right? Make it harder. Don't make it easy, right? So there are a lot of physical security and cybersecurity training that you see is all about that mindset, as well as the awareness, as well as building walls.
What do you think? Thank you. What do you think, Supreet?
The moment Genie mentioned fake cameras, I'm really tempted to pick up on that. And Michel Foucault is a French philosopher. He in fact wrote about this specific topic in a book called Power, right? He mentioned this as something called a panopticon, right? And the idea here is that the jail is built as a circular construct. And in the middle, you build a tower, okay? So each cell's window is facing towards that tower. Now, you could put the guards in that tower, and you end up with being able to surveil the entire jail very easily. Now, that model is easy. Everyone can comfortably see that model and go, sure, nice architectural model. But what Michel Foucault did next was extremely radical, which is what he said, now I ask you a question. Is there a need for anyone to surveil from that tower? Because the person in the cell would surveil themselves, assuming that tower exists, and there is someone in that tower.
Mm.
Yeah. So it's self-surveillance, and this was at that point in time, I think probably at start of the modern age in certain senses. We ended up with self-surveillance. Yeah. Self-censorship.
Yes.
Yeah.
Self-censorship.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's a complete aside from technology elements of
Exactly.
the conversation.
There is an aspect which overlaps, which is that if you get people to feel that you are monitoring on
Yeah.
a constant basis,
Yeah.
then you are deterring a set of folks, right? Somebody once told me from the government here in Singapore once said that you break up the adversary population into 99 and 1. That is, the 90% of folks would be amateurs, young folks, or maybe somebody new to technology, just trying their luck to see, can I break into this database? Can I now attack this network using simple tools that they learned from maybe a YouTube video online, just playing around, right? Then there would be that 9% of folks that would be much more organized. This is your nation states, this is your trained technologies, developers, cybersecurity professionals who know what they're doing. They have a higher chance of breaking into your systems. And then there's
people like you and I. Like seriously, this is us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We can take a tutorial, we can learn, we can build something on top of it, we can organize ourselves, we can start to create incentive mechanisms, we can start to then go into a certain environment as anonymously as possible, right? We have that knowledge of doing this. Then there is a 1% which is at the level of genius. This would be folks that are so highly trained, organized, and resourced. This would be your top 1%, even amongst your nation states, right? So if you have an army, this would be your special forces within the army, who if they decide they want to get into something, through social engineering, through technologies, they'll figure their way in, no matter what you do, right? So in all instances, what you say, Genie, helps because you're creating deterrence by having a concept of walls, right? But what I wanted to ask and clarify is there a way for us to design technology which is secure from the start? So even if you break past all the walls and you get to the tech or you get to the data, it's still not useful for you.
I think it's relativities again, because I think I can make it harder and harder and harder, right? Until the point that you either drop out while you're trying, or make it not worthwhile in terms of the efforts I'm going through to retrieve those information. But at the same time, there is a cost to me as well.
Yeah.
Right. Striking that balance is extremely difficult, and it's a dynamic. I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all solution. I think it's all going down to what you try to protect, right? I actually hear a very interesting radio broadcast this morning when I come in, right? They're talking about scam, talking about safe deposit, right? And one of the guys was asking, was there any lower limit on a safe deposit? Because you can, for example, you have $30,000, you can actually lock in a safe deposit. No one else can actually charge an attempt to steal that. It's actually going down to the path. People were laughing about the concept of do you want to protect your $3?
Yeah.
All right. So I think it's all relativity. What do you try to protect? Going back to the concept we just talked about, is the classification of your assets. How much effort do you want to put into protect it? Where the rest will be something which could be public knowledge, could be less useful information.
Yes.
And also, you put in the right tactic in place, you can actually confuse the attackers in this case, right? How can you actually? Is that very difficult to go try to break in to get something less meaningful, right? So you not become the target in this case. So I think it's something very important to keep that in mind.
What about you, Supreet? Thoughts?
Most of the attacks that we have worked on in this particular role, as well as previous ones, I think what is typical vector of attack is social engineering as a starting point. Then if there is skill around technology, that accelerates and magnifies.
Mm.
So building a steeplechase track makes it harder. Then I'm taking a parallels of steeplechase rather than a wall,
Okay.
because wall is a protection, but wall is also a place where you can get isolated. So you really
Yeah.
start lacking that communication with the rest of the world. So
Yeah.
your tooling becomes older. You're not getting enough community interfaces to actually learn new ideas. On the other hand, there was this question of how do you sort of protect only, let's say, only specifically IT. And I'll go into some esoteric computing history here. There is a system that was built, it's called Elbrus, which was built by Russians. We don't appreciate enough because it's not known much. And it was built entirely from bottom up.
What is this? What was
This is a computer
Okay.
which had a type system built into the system.
Mhm.
It had an entire set of constructs around protection, but then it was so hard to write software for it that it never became popular. It was very specific to certain needs,
Yes.
but exceptional when it came to being able to serve those specific needs. In fact, funny enough,
Which year was this?
this was in late 80s,
Okay.
and we do see artifacts of the system, as in from an inspiration perspective, in Itanium, which was Intel's attempt at 64-bit computing. We see it in Sun Microsystem when they started building their microprocessors. But the thing with that is that the challenges are so high, and even the people who want this protected environment still want to use Zoom, they still want to use email, and writing software for such systems is challenging. So in that sense, what we have come to is lowest common denominator, which is the commodity computer, which is not as good at it going by duct tape and spit.
Yes.
But on the other hand, we can do recordings on it. We could do audio. We could play movie, and the same computer is probably used by CyberCR to do security, right? And in that sense, the human element to it becomes extremely important.
This cannot continue, right, Supreet? What you just described, which is your duct tape spit environment, and you're building more and more advanced technologies on top of it.
Yeah, we see, the thing is that we don't realize that how fragile our systems are in that sense.
Yes.
And probably sovereigns and enterprises who have the kind of budget don't really invest enough because there isn't enough appreciation of that fact.
Yes.
Yeah.
And appreciation of that fact, the environment in which it can grow would be increasing attacks, successful breaches. Security is something we want to take seriously and start dedicating serious attention to it, right? Which is what is happening in our world now.
Yeah. Actually, this is historically we are in a very interesting spot.
Yes, why is that?
Because until now, if we look at anything before World War II, there wasn't any form of unification of economic incentives, right? Everyone had their sort of a sphere of influence of sorts, right? So Europe sort of was in same sphere of influence. India or Southeast Asia in its own sphere of influence. I think World War II and post World War II, we are in this unique zone where relatively speaking, we are in a safe environment. So we haven't seen a massive war for ages. We haven't seen enough enlistment. So the amount of paranoia and in that sense stress around securing your environment in certain senses isn't as high, and hence that translates into lack of investment. So that
Behavior
could
at the
be in
company level.
technology, that could be from a perspective of supply chain. We are entrusting a lot of our life to insecure environments. We could basically go through the entire internet stack, and you start knocking on the door and you realize that there is massive gaps on security. It takes the simplest one, which is DNS, right? DNS is probably
Domain name service.
the domain name service. I believe it's the spine of internet, right? So what it does is it, at the simplest level, what it's doing is picking up a name, because humans are very bad at remembering numbers. Someone discovered that, and then that name is converted into a number, which is used for reaching the server that the person is interested in, or reaching a set of servers that the person is interested in. It's by default DNS is unsafe,
Why is that?
because it was built in an environment where you've got university folks who literally know each other and they are emailing each other. That's the environment in which DNS was built. And suddenly it has become economic spine of our environment and
Of the
and
global environment.
of the global environment. And in that sense, as we go into a situation where globalization agenda is at least fragmented, if not broken, the social contracts around globalization are kind of showing its
Are getting tested for sure.
for getting tested for sure. One nation may not want to entrust another nation to give them right information on untrusted wire like DNS.
Mm.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's unlikely that we will start again things from scratch, but alliances will form where there's an alliance of trust.
Yeah.
Or do you think even that is getting tested?
I believe that's also getting tested, but even internet as one coherent single entity is probably will get tested in next few years.
Likely to split into at least two.
I don't know how many, and I don't want to speculate, because that's going into realm of politics rather than technology.
Okay, so let's come back to technology,
Yeah.
right? Okay, Genie, what do you think? Inherently, systems are insecure?
That's again, probably not as technical, or probably not as as an expert in security like like Supreet, right? My point of view always come in from end user point of view, because I help a lot of them to advance the journey, a digital journey, or a journey on leveraging digital assets. When you're actually talking about a system, I think we talked about that just now. There's not going to be perfect system. Doesn't matter how many walls you build, right? When you look at security again, it all also on the other hand comes in from a impact perspective, all right? Because that impacts the confidence of someone or their perceived with your organization. As a very simple example, what happens if you hear a security breach, regardless what information it was leaked of a bank? What do you think? All right, straight away, doesn't matter whether it is literally the public information on the website versus your personal information or the financial transaction. Those are really, really well protected, probably nowhere close, right? When someone knock at your door and nowhere close to the safe box they put behind the triple firewalls, but they crack the first door and actually go in and actually grab something from your mailbox, and then they say, oh yeah, I cracked the bank. What do you think the public perceive the security measure for the bank, right? So when we actually go in, I actually led the team before to do a security assessment for some data platform of a bank. The first thing we'll go in is actually, apart from looking at the assets classification we just talked about, but also looking at their procedures about, the impact, right? How much do you care? How much do you see as a risk? How much can you tolerate, right? And put them into perspective. Then we have a 4x4, A by A matrix to look at what do you need to do. Again, organizations nowadays have tens or hundreds, even thousands of systems, right? Which one is the weak link? Are we actually put them into all perspective and measure against every single one of them? Or are we just care about the one that is very, very important to you?
Mission critical to you.
Mission critical.
Yeah.
But I argue in this case, you always protect really well on your mission critical. It's very unlikely you hear, right, attack against your mission critical information, your very high classification. But the impact could be as big because people perceive you are not safe, right?
Yeah,
This
so
case-
even the non-mission critical needs to be maintained to a level where it should not become a reputational risk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think the folks in financial services, as an example, people worry about certain information. All right. I think there are completely different mindset and measures
Yeah.
versus someone in a different industry. Right. So
Genie, you are touching on some very interesting points. One is definitely moving away from compliance-based, check-the-box mindset to something that's risk-based. You're looking at high, medium, low risk, mission critical, non-mission critical, but even non-mission critical treated properly because reputational risk. That's what you're saying. Do you see
Before we get to the question, I think what's also interesting there is how our customers at Couchbase tend to appreciate the product because it's the thought process around is security first, and that's why
Trust
we are
nothing.
able to get into the customer base which entrusts us with, especially the payment area or FSIs, where they entrust our product to their trusted environments.
Okay. Yeah, so let's talk about that. I'll come to the question. Just remember this part, right? So let's talk about that. Couchbase and security.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that the stance around security for Couchbase is simplicity, which is that you can typically what happens is that the security posture is so complex that you can't build a mental model. A single person can't build a mental model around it, right? And that creates a massive challenge because organizationally, your shape of security stance is dwelling inside minds of several people, and it's fragile because simply by losing one person, you lose institutional knowledge of the matrix, right? And you end up with hopscotch. So that's a challenge. What Couchbase does is the simplicity where your data assets specifically are multimodal. So as digital native business, FSIs are now trying very hard to get into digital native business space with the kind. So there are two pressures that FSIs face today. One is
FSI is being financial service.
financial service. Sorry for that.
No
So
worries.
FSIs are facing.
Yeah.
One, I think, is around startups triggering innovation in user experience, and FSIs appreciate that, and they are trying to build better experience for their customers. And second part, I think, is that FSIs until a certain point in time were focused around populace, which was much smaller, and the volume of people who were underserved and now being built, like lined into digital sort of banking systems has increased. So they can't be using old systems which would rely on one, legacy infrastructure, two, is not integrated and has that capability to stream the entire workflow online instead of relying on store forward kind of situation, which translates into they need modern infrastructure, which typically includes, from a data perspective, specifically data perspective, it needs, let's say, key value store, it needs a full text search, it needs a document database, and probably because everyone is familiar with SQL. And in that, funny enough, Couchbase is all of that in a single infrastructure. So whilst we don't talk about it specifically as a multimodal database, you can have all the behaviors in a single database.
Okay.
But also something very important that we talked about before was how do you actually build something on top of the the bandage, right? It's like a bandage solution. Where I actually see a lot of legacy when they actually see the modern demand and they're trying to say, oh, you know what, I think I need to get the product ready for that.
Yeah.
Right. So what they cannot do is they build it from the ground up. What they can do is like, okay, this is my product, I'm putting other, functions and features. But architectural, they are not built for that. So that means they have to build the features and functions on top of the existing, right? Then security sits on top of that. On the other hand, where Couchbase is a modern technology, modern architecture, where security is built from the ground up, right? Alongside with its core architecture. And this is also a very key differentiator why you should actually worry a lot less when you're actually looking at a modern technology like this compared against the legacy where they try to stretch their arms and to be able to, fit into the modern requirement where their security become one of the other added on features where
it's bolted on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, gentlemen, I heard about the merits of Couchbase. Ready for the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Is it a hard one? If it's a hard one, it's for Genie.
No problem. I'll take it on.
So let's see now. You've come. So the question earlier was, you're moving from compliance-based to risk-based, right? Risk-based, high, medium, low. Even your low, which is non-mission critical in your words, please take care of it because reputational risk. We are aligned on that.
Yeah.
You also mentioned something earlier about Couchbase from its architectural design perspective, incorporating security practices, right? Quite a mouthful. We'll dig deeper into that a bit.
Sure.
Now, a question I have is this happening on a continuous basis or is this happening on a point in time, which is like once a month, once in 6 months, once in 12 months? Is the data that is being encrypted, is there a point at which the data is exposed? How do you look at it? Don't have to answer specifically from a Couchbase perspective. I'm not trying to bring anyone into a corner. But I'm just saying overall, right? Like, what do you see?
Much of the product, if you look at the product capabilities as well as the product roadmap, you'll find that security is not tactical. Security is part and parcel of how data is seen on the infrastructure. And in that sense, but coming back, it does not mean that the user experience gets impinged. So there is a significant thought that goes into from a product ethos perspective, which sort of shapes itself around UX versus security.
Mhm.
And whilst from a database experience, like Genie has already said, that security is orthogonal, which is mountful, which essentially means that it's bolted on. I think by default, Couchbase uses digital native constructs to ensure that the security is part of on-wire security, it's part of storage security, and structurally when the consumer picks up the data, it's secure. Eventually, you have to believe that the application does the right thing. Databases don't have the realm of access beyond application. But until the application and underneath, so I'm looking from a top-down perspective, front end on the top and databases at the bottom. The element which concerns us is SDK onwards to how disk activities happen, and there I believe Couchbase has gotten a comprehensive governance mechanism around security, and it's relatively, I would also say, it's not that hard to build if you're building a modern infrastructure, because you find that in last 10 years the database technology has been the innovation in database technology has been fueled by some hardware systems that have been built. So as an example, now you can encrypt straight away from the CPU to RAM. Imagine that. Did you imagine that happening when you started using computer?
No.
Yeah. SSD controllers can encrypt, so you can get the NAND out, you will not get the data, right?
Yeah.
So those kind of,
I think also importantly to actually understand where the hacker will pick in terms of points of attack, right? So very simple analogy, you see a wall, right? You see a security premise there. You're not going to try to break the wall. Most of the people won't. They were actually looking at all the integration points because that's the weak link, all right? So Couchbase, assuming you will actually build a pretty solid, premise here, but we still have integration points.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, technology is a tool, people using it, all right? If you decide to leave the door open, leave the windows unlocked, there's nothing that I can help you, all right? So if you decide to say, you know what, by default is turn on wire encryption and this encryption is turned on, you can turn that off. I cannot help you if you decide to say, hey, you know what, because of the testing purpose, I actually turn off the HTTPS for the simplicity of connection, and I do not turn that back on when I actually go into production. I can't do anything about that. So it's in reality, when we're doing most of the assessment, when I actually let a team of consultants going on site to do that, the most part that we check is not about the technology itself. It's about how you're using it.
Yeah.
Right? So you have the key management system. Are you using it? Are you exchange keys all the time? Right? If you don't, that's where the problem is. When you have integration, do you have...
I have a question. Thank you for this point here. This key management system that we have, do you have recommendations on how often should developers toggle their keys? Do you as Couchbase or personally have a point of view about this?
Okay. Now, it depends on where stage you are in, right? So if you're in development stage, forget about it, right? It's overhead, right? And all of this needs to be implemented before you go to production, right? All the procedure, if you work for an enterprise, you should have very thorough procedures in front of you and say, what you need to implement, because before you go to production, you're supposed to go through a security scan as well as security council approval before you can put this in.
Yes.
And in the development stage, you shouldn't worry about that as a developer.
Okay.
Now, if you actually get into the area and start implementing some policies, start actually working in the field, and you are the one that writing down procedures, I think it's all going down to how practical it is versus, again, going back to the assets classification.
Sure.
Okay. So normally, what I see is in the key rotation, as an example, typically we see between weeks to months. All right, I'm talking about once a month. All right. Otherwise, every single key rotation will take some time to refresh all of the data behind the scene.
Yes.
So that also ties back to the effort on the database side, all right? So you have relatively small amounts of data, the rotation of key will take a lot easier and a lot faster. Now, when you actually have big amounts of data and you have 24/7 operation and do not have downtime, that's where you need to be very careful, all right? And that's where, advantage of Couchbase will come in when you have dynamic scaling, all right? You can actually scale portion of your database to give a lot more compute power if you know you need to do a lot of rotation of keys and some of those operations without taking the database offline.
Now, let's say you have a key, right? So 3 months and 6 months, right?
Okay.
Your key has been in existence for 3 months and 6 months. And the policy is that we need to rotate keys every 4 months, right? Now, how do I detect that your key is actually 6 months old? What's the current way of detecting that?
Doesn't key also has a timestamp now?
Key has a timestamp.
Yeah.
Sure, the key has a timestamp. It was created.
Who's
of
vending the
XYZ.
key? Is it being created by the end user, Alice and Bob, or
Doesn't matter.
There
It-
are
I don't-
multiple ways, right?
Yeah.
It depends on where you're checking. All right.
Yeah.
If you're checking a key, as Supreet mentioned, that you should have a timestamp. You can very quickly verify.
How do you check? Manually?
It depends on what.
in
purpose you
IT
check.
nothing is happening manually. We talked about it. Everything is mediated.
Okay.
Yeah, but
So is it eyeballs? Like, are you looking at the timestamp?
interesting question. Even
Yes.
though ideally we know we are not supposed to do that, it's probably not a practice. But in reality, a lot of organizations, especially a smaller one, because in reality is implementing such thing in automated fashion
Yes.
require not only time but expertise. Right,
Yes.
as Supreet mentioned, there are so many vendors out there. How do we actually getting everything lined up? It's probably not as easy.
Yeah.
All right. So in this case, ideally, you should have an exception report pop in your email and say, hey, you know what, it has not happened.
Yeah.
Right. You should be actually, if policy says 4 months, and the third month you should be getting a notice about 1
he
month
gets a notice.
expiry.
Yeah.
All right, and
No,
then
mine is 3 months.
Yes, but
Bob 2
at the
has
third
3
month.
months.
So at the third month, suppose you are 3 months, rotation key is 4 months, you should
Yeah.
get a notification 1 month in advance. That's what this policymaker is saying, right? So you should get 1 month in advance, a notice automatically.
but
So we are
Ideal
talking
world.
about the mechanisms, right?
Yes.
I think simply I wouldn't recommend a vendor, but even as an early stage, it's worthwhile picking up on some sort of a.
Solution.
It's costly to build this solution out.
Yes.
And what I find challenging even for expert technologists is security tends to involve a lot of rules that anyone can write it. So writing a homebrew logic around this kind of governance at early stage, as well as I've seen in large organization also, is extremely challenging.
It
It
is.
is.
So while without me and Genie recommending a specific one, I think it's a good idea to have a vendor which can, one, vend the keys on your behalf, two, is able to also do this kind of automation on when to cycle keys or what keys to be cycled. And even going further, roles based vending of keys for a specific call. So as an example, an application does not hold the key at all. I know that even cloud vendors go out and check GitHub repository for their keys now, because it's becoming challenging where somebody's built software and embedded their keys,
Yes.
and it circularly comes back and becomes a reputational risk for the cloud vendor because along with the customer, cloud vendors kind of gets into a focus from a PR perspective.
Yes.
So in that sense, what makes sense is to have a role-based plus something like a KMS system, which
Key management system.
which vends keys for a certain amount of lease of time. So you, on an application build side, you don't have to think about the key because you can have a mock interface to it, and in case of production, you are interfacing with a key management system which gives you the rights to use a certain technology.
Thank you. I think that's a very thoughtful answer. Thank you very much for this.
No, I think operationalized security is extremely difficult because we are not talking about defense one thing. We're talking about defending the entire war.
Yeah.
All right. We are talking about we need to make sure everything is patched up because even though you have a small hole, people will find it.
Yes.
Right. We're not talking about just defending for today. We're talking about defending 24/7, almost infinitively. So I think if you ask me what is the hardest part, right? On one end is on the design, right? On the other hand is on operations.
Yeah.
Right, because it's extremely boring and it's extremely hard because you need to make sure you focus.
Yes.
And the attacker will just like pick your weakness at the specific time, and you need to be when you defend, you need to be continuously paying the attention. All right, so it is hard, but at the same time is needed.
Yeah.
Right. So I think what's very important is to keep the principle ready in people's mind, all right? When the next time you go out and actually see people ask you to change passwords, it is good, right? It's annoying because I need to come up with all the new password, rotating key all the time, but it's needed, right? Because we need to know that people are, doing their job to protect our information. I think that awareness is very, very important. So coming back down to people awareness, building the defense team together, rather than relying on the smartest AI, smartest technology, smartest individual, and smartest vendors to do all the job for you. I think it's everyone's responsibility.
Can I also take a tangential angle to this, and I'll bring it back to the same discussion. Airlines used to be a flying representation of the country's success of sorts. And when the construct of startups started out, earlier they were called small and medium industry, and then you suddenly had startups and it became relatively fashionable to call yourself startups. I think have become part of national identity. So you start off small, you're fragile, but then at some point in time, you're massive enough that you represent national identity or national success.
Yes.
And what you are also today looking at is a situation not just your own reputation, your sovereign nation, representation of ability of the sovereign nation to protect their parameter. So that is another extraneous angle you need to look at when you're looking at your cybersecurity. So the weight on your shoulders is much higher than just perimeter security of your company or your employees or
But that's
the
a good
data
problem
asset.
to have.
It's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
But startups should think about it as early as possible because they could become a way to identify the sovereign nation they
But
represent.
that's actually the biggest challenge I actually argue, right? Because if you're looking at startup, the nature of startup is survival.
Yeah.
Right? When you are constrained on time, you're constrained on resources, where do you actually find the right balance to invest on something is less important than their survival?
Yes.
All right? That is the very, very interesting dynamic because when you actually go into the university and see the students, I had the luxury to teach a bunch of MBA, very, very smart MBA. And they learn very, very good stuff from academic about how to do things properly 1 to 10. Like security, you can do 1 to 10. There is a textbook for it.
Yeah.
You find many, many good books. But when you have time constraint and resource constraint, and that's what I call the reality. So what do you do then? Do you still do 1 to 10? Because when you actually go to 3, you run out of money, and when you go to 7, you run out of time.
Yeah.
So what do you pick and choose? That is a dynamic that everyone needs to pay attention to, especially in startup in this case, because survival problem is your day-to-day problem. Security is not.
That is a great prelude to why public goods are forming around security.
Yeah.
Because startups can't afford to just purely focus on they can't afford budgets on security, they can't afford time, they don't have trained manpower, right?
Yeah.
But still you have a huge segment of the economy that is starting up.
Yeah.
And governments want that, and consumers want that, businesses want that. So you have this situation. That's why you have public goods that are forming up, where you have best practices involved into the company's sort of operations from very early days. Right?
Yeah.
So it's
With
like
yes.
let's call it commons of
Yes,
sort.
that's right. Yeah, public good. So should there be a public good which is a high quality key management system? Should there be a public good which is a DDoS solution? Should there be a public good that's doing continuous pen testing?
Yeah.
Those are being discussed now in policies.
It's a very interesting thought process. I never came across this, but I'll first also close this thought on survival of startups. Startups actually tends to be in two phases, where early on they are in survival, and in as a second order when they have reached a point where, let's call it inflection point of market fit, the sense of stress is the same, but the question becomes slightly modified, which is irrelevance. So if you don't pay attention, you become irrelevant. So it moves from survival to irrelevance very quickly. So that stress never goes away. Yeah, it's just, I think as old folks,
We're getting all
our sense of adventure is not disappearing.
true.
And this is the only place where you can get a high.
With that, we have come to the end of our Safe Tech Talk series today. We hope to have you both back for another session. Thank you very much, Genie. Thank you so much.
Stay easy with Couchbase.